No sneezing. Oh my god. Get in there good. Okay. Hi guys, my name is Katya, and this is a video about books. Usually I do like this end of year book review on my TikTok, but I just think the books deserve a little more talking time, and TikTok just doesn't allow for that. And I read 36 books this year. I loved like the majority of them. They were so good. So I thought I would share and talk about them more on here. This is just like a better way for me to get my thoughts out. So just as a preface about my taste in books and kind of what I look for, because for me, a book has to do two things. It has to be really good storytelling, but it also has to have really good prose. Because I think part of what makes a book so valuable, and it's like the mastery and craftsmanship of writing, is really important to me, at least when I'm reading books. So, okay. This is Leo. He's gonna help me. Well, not really. He doesn't help with much. But he's so sweet, isn't he? Okay. He's gonna have to go. He's gonna have to dip. Okay, big buddy boy. I'm not necessarily gonna go in order of how I read these books, more so in how they contributed to a certain like time in my life. Kind of what I got from them. I think part of what I seek in books is like some sort of advice in a sense. There's always like a little golden nugget if the book is good. I found those golden nuggets in the books I read this year. I got really lucky. There's no method to the madness in terms of how I choose the books that I read. A lot of times it's kind of like kismet. Like I'll be browsing at a bookstore. I always look at the back cover to see what it's about, and if the theme is something I'm interested in or like I connect with, then I give it some thought. And a lot of times I'll go to different bookstores, and if a certain book keeps jumping out at me, I'll be like, okay, let me take this home and try it out. So a lot of these books were like that. Some of them I sought out specific themes, or like I was dealing with something and I really wanted answers in a sense. I recommend like the vast majority of the books that I'm going to talk about in this video, and I hope that you guys get some really good recommendations, because this is kind of like all over the place in terms of what I was reading, but I do think I have pretty good taste. So let's begin. I'm going to keep fixing my hair throughout this video because I got layers. Now, it bothers me that I have layers, of course. So the first thing I want to talk about is Ruth Ozeki, because I read 2 of her books and they were both incredible and stellar. She is a winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction, Booker Prize finalist. Like, she's incredibly achieved as an author, and when you read her books, you know why. So the first book that I read by her was A Tale for the Time Being. How do I describe this? This is like 2 parallel stories. It's basically this woman on like Vancouver Island. Something washes up on the shore and she thinks that it's from like the 2011 tsunami that devastated Japan, and she finds this diary of this little girl who was basically writing about how, her family is falling apart and all her teenage thoughts and like the hardships of growing up. And this little girl was like committed to, by the end of the book, killing herself, not to be grim. I think it's very rare for an author to write about and like accurately depict what adolescence is like. I think the only other author I've seen do this successfully is Elena Ferrante, who's like an all-time favorite of mine. This had a lot more humor. I think it's a lot more modern in prose, but this book was just incredible and sad and provocative and happy and hilarious, and there's just so much packed into this, and I really cannot imagine a person not enjoying this because it's so multifaceted and the story is so interesting. A huge recommend. I cannot say enough good things about this. The second book that I read by Ruth Ozeki is The Book of Form and Emptiness. This is a little bit of a different storyline. This again deals with adolescence. It's about this boy who starts like hearing whisperings from different objects after his dad passes away, and it's him like spiraling. Her stories almost go into like fantasy realism, I think that's what it's called. But both books were incredibly good. They're very hard to describe in terms of their plot line. That just feels like you're basically diving into like this all-encompassing story. I can't say enough good things. Pick up a copy of her stuff. Okay, this is all the Russian literature that I read for my Russian lit class. I took it the last semester of college. Besides these books, we read a lot of like short stories and parts of anthologies, but these are the full books that we were made to read. I'm Russian, so I wanted to take this class partly because I wanted to be in an academic space when I was exploring this literature, so I had someone to talk to about the things that I was reading and to contextualize it, all that good stuff. So The class proved to be incredibly enriching. That's the word I think I'm looking for. I'm going to talk about like the 4 main books that we read, and some of them I liked, some of them I didn't like that much. I'm going to start with the obvious tome, which is Anna Karenina, and I think it's something like 800 pages, if not more. It's about 800 pages, yeah. We kind of had to race through this book because it's so big and there was just no time in the semester. There's so much to be said about Anna Karenina. I mean, like, you can go watch thousands of videos and analysis. This is obviously like one of the most famous books in the world. In terms of what I thought about it, I think this is one of those books that, like, if you can dedicate the time to sit with it, do it. I was just not in a place to sit with it. It deals a lot with the questions of like family and love and fidelity. I feel like I'm giving a really poor analysis of this book, but it just didn't stand out to me as much. It's really great. I think there's like a big chunk in the middle that I'm still confused on how it serves the plot. But what's important to know about a book like Anna Karenina was that it was published in like parts over years. It's a completely different reading experience when you're waiting to see what happens. We obviously can race through the book in one go. You gotta give it a try, but I can't say it's like my new favorite book, but I'm glad that I read it. Another book that we read was Eugene, Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. Pushkin is like considered to be the star of Russian literature. He's this poet. He was known to be able to just like off the cuff talk in prose, and you know, he was just this incredible literary figure. So Eugene Onegin is a novel written completely in prose. It rhymes, all of it. It follows this man who is part of high society who really doesn't give a fuck about anyone or anything. This young girl falls in love with him, he breaks her heart, and then they end up meeting back up later down the line, and he kind of learns that she's become a completely different woman and she doesn't want to take him back, etc. This is just a joy to read because it rhymes and it's kind of like Dr. Seuss for adults. I don't want to in any way desecrate what Pushkin has done by calling him Dr. Seuss. You know, Dr. Seuss serves its purpose too. But don't think a lot of people in the Western world are aware of this book, but they should be, because it's just like an enriching experience and you can race through it. It's really fun, so give it a try. Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. This had to be my favorite that we read. I think the title kind of speaks for itself. It's about these 2 classmates that come home from university back to their family home. They find that their parents are of a different set of values. Their parents kind of exist in a completely different reality from them. Boys are nihilists and they're kind of very cynical about the state of the world. Their parents are from a completely different time. They believe in beauty and family values and things of that sort. It's tension. There's a lot of exploration about this age-old question of children and parents and how we kind of reconcile our differences and what it means to change. So that was Fathers and Sons. The last book we read was Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lerememtov. It follows this young army officer as he kind of explores the steppes in Russia, you know, bouncing in and out of social life. This is just one of those books that I think is better read in an academic setting. I don't think I would have found this otherwise like entertaining or worthwhile. It just provides a lot of context into that time and how Russia and its empire was changing. So that was Hero of Our Time. The next set of books I want to talk about, I'm going to categorize this as page turners, because these are books that just swallow you whole and they do not release their grip on you until the very last page. 2 Nights in Lisbon is a thriller. It's a mystery. So this woman wakes up in a Lisbon hotel room and her husband is gone, and she basically spends 2 full days looking for him, and she's uncovering a lot of his like background, his secrets. She's being tracked, and it's really, really fast-paced, and you only get to know who he really is and why he disappeared, all that stuff in the last couple of pages. So this was incredibly gripping. Would I say it's my new favorite novel? No. Does it get you into reading if you're like in a reading slump? 100%. This was 2 Nights in Lisbon by Pavone. The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. I cannot say enough good things about this book. I'm obsessed with this book. It's also, I think, like 600 pages, so it's pretty long. Bret Easton Ellis actually wrote American Psycho, and some of the same themes and style of writing appear in this book. He names the main character of this book Brett after himself. It's kind of like autobiographical, but Brett is basically a rich teenager in Los Angeles in 1981. He's a senior in high school. Through like a flurry of drugs and drinking and exploits comes in this new classmate who Brett is like super suspicious of. He thinks that he might be the serial killer that's been like terrorizing LA. He just kind of spirals into his paranoia and you follow him into that spiral. This was so gripping. I could not put this book down. The only warning that I would give anybody that wants to read this book, two warnings actually. First being, there's a lot of graphic content in here. There's a lot of like descriptions of like torture and bodily mutilation. And the second thing is this is sexually graphic. I think about half this book was sex scenes. But nonetheless, I loved this book. I think I'm going to recommend it to everybody. I don't see enough people talking about the shards, and I really think they should, because this was so good. Oh my God, am I excited to talk about this book. I feel like I'm saying this about all the books that I'm picking up, but I had a really lucky reading year because there's so many great books that I was able to read. This is The Magician by Somerset Maugham. I've read Of Human Bondage by him. I loved that book. It's like one of my favorites. This book is shorter, but the themes in here are what attracted me. It's basically set at the turn of the century in Paris, so like 1900s, and we follow this couple that meets this very grotesque man who says he's like a magician, a warlock of some sorts. They don't believe him, but he deals with the occult, and they kind of get drawn into his madness. Just crazy stuff goes down, and I was holding my breath until the last sentence. It was that good. So that was The Magician by Somerset Maugham. Famous book, but The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Now, I have read, I think it's called We Have Always Lived in the Castle by her. I picked up this copy because I wanted something a little bit creepy. It's kind of hard to describe this type of horror because it always feels like an impending doom, but nothing crazy ever really happens in this book. And it leaves you like a little bit confused at the end. The ending's a little bit ambiguous. I thought it was a great book. Would I pick it up again? Not necessarily. I actually really liked We Have Always Lived in the Castle more. I'm glad that I was able to read it. Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. The last page turner that I really liked was called Mother Naked. I sadly don't have it on my person. I randomly discovered it while I was in London at a bookshop. At first I thought I wouldn't enjoy it because it's written in the style of Old English, so it like takes a second to get into the atmosphere of the story. It's basically about this jester that comes to this medieval village in England, and he's telling the story of how this particular village is like unraveling, its demise. And you slowly come to realize that this jester is actually the main character. He used to live in this village until he escaped. It was so suspenseful and gripping. I was so pleasantly surprised. I haven't seen anybody else talk about it, but I really thought it was like an incredible piece of literature and so creative and original. So if you're able to get yourself a copy, definitely pick up Mother Naked. Stick with it, even though the first couple of pages can get really confusing because of the Old English. The next category I'm calling books that made me think a lot. What I mean by this is I was searching for books that kind of talked about like the broader world, broader ideas about how to live life, how do we navigate this world, what do we owe to this world, how do we create things that are good. I only have one on hand sadly, but I'll start with that one. It's called Permacrisis. It's written by Gordon Brown, Mohammed El Arian, and Michael Spence, with Reed Lidow as co-author. They wrote this book as a way to talk about all the issues that our world is facing today. I think if you're interested at all to know kind of the broader scope of what's going on and the issues that populations are going to face, what are we going to have to face in the future, things like that, I think this is a really great book. There's so many topics that they cover here, and the best part is that the purpose of this book is to give a solution out of this state of a permacrisis, as they call it. I loved this book, and I'm gonna recommend it to anybody who just wants to get acquainted with the state of things in general. So the three other books I sadly don't have on my person. I'm going to start with the one I read first, which was 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. Now, I know this man is a controversial figure, but 0 to 1 was written years and years ago. I thought 0 to 1 was actually a really grounded exploration of how we achieve something productive, how we create progress, and how good ideas become great. He talks a lot about having a vision that is years and years ahead and working towards that vision. I thought it was actually really inspiring. So regardless of how you feel about him, I think the book itself is actually proposes a lot of really great and positive ideas. The other book that I read was Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And Start With Why is basically talking about how to have a North Star regardless of what it is that you're doing. The whole thesis of the book is that you always have to start with the why before you start doing anything else. And that there's two kinds of people in the world, which is ideas people, people with vision, and people who help them execute that vision. And if those two people find each other, usually it creates magic. This doesn't just apply to somebody who's trying to build like a successful company, even though that's who he wrote it for. I think anybody who feels a little bit lost can find great value in it. So that was Start With Why by Simon Sinek. Okay, and the last book that really made me think was How to Win a Propaganda War by Peter Pomerantsev. So he is an academic who studies propaganda and how it functions across history and in the modern world. And this book was about a man who plotted against Hitler. He worked with the British Secret Service, and he was able to outsmart Hitler with his propaganda machine. So it talks about bigger ideas of how propaganda is created, why we feed into certain ideas, how media kind of corrupts or manipulates us, and how easy it is to get people to, switch their minds. And I never considered propaganda to be something that I was interested in, but this author does such an incredible job of storytelling with this book. And so if that sounds interesting, I definitely recommend it. Okay, my next category is going to be books that have a lot of practical knowledge. As somebody who's building a startup and working on my own project, this was basically my due diligence. This is going to be a pretty quick section. The first book is Hooked by Nir Eyal. This is a practical guide on how to build products that engage people and keep people coming back. The second book is Obsessed by Emily Hayward. She is the co-founder of Red Antler, which is this branding and marketing agency that deals a lot with consumer startups. So like think Casper, Glossier, Allbirds, that was all her company. So I really admire her and I think what she does is really cool. This book for me was a little bit of a letdown. She talks a lot about building these, groundbreaking brands like Allbirds and Casper and how they did it. I didn't take a lot away from this. Now, for the book that I enjoyed the most, this is Build by Tony Fadell. So Tony is the founder of Nest Thermostats. He also built the iPod. He was kind of like on the founding team of Apple. This entire book basically leans on anecdotes from his time working at Apple, his time creating Nest, selling the company, exiting, whatever. I thought it was really helpful and insightful, and he's got a great sense of humor and great voice, and there's a lot of practical advice. Again, not just for people who want to do startups and build products, but I think anybody who is career driven. This was really helpful, and I hope one day to meet this man because I'm obsessed with this book. The last kind of practical book that really helped me was Wear It Well by Alison Bornstein. Alison is a celebrity stylist, and she kind of wrote this book as a way to help people purge their closets, understand their personal style, and get into the habit of loving what your closet has to offer. I was dealing a lot with personal style issues. I hated everything I wore. I was having confidence issues, and I dedicated my summer to kind of figuring out what my personal style was. And a huge aspect of that journey was Alison's book. I really loved it. And thank you, Allison, for writing the book. It was really helpful. Forgot about this other book that I read, which is Trust Me, I'm Lying by Ryan Holiday. Trust Me, I'm Lying is a book about how he worked as a self-proclaimed media manipulator. He caused storms in the media and creates scandals and do all this stuff to get publicity. And he talks about how media buying and selling works, how clicks work, all that stuff. I enjoyed the book. I took a lot of notes. And again, I'm sad I don't have my copy, but very helpful if you're interested in the media world. Another book, practical book that I forgot. This is Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury. Of the Harvard Negotiation Project. I just thought this would be a cool book to pick up. Deals a lot with their experience on navigating global conflicts and conflict resolution in general. But it was really interesting because they break down how people negotiate, what kind of stakes are at hand, and how to get through even the toughest types of negotiations. Just one of those really interesting books, and it's pretty short. So at the beginning of this year, I was in my final semester of college, and I think I was just going through a lot of mental turmoil and trying to make sense of what it's like to transfer into adulthood and how to deal with people and just how to navigate life with a sense of confidence. I was just, I guess, looking for answers and some sort of like camaraderie in the literature that I was reading. So I picked up two very different books. First being Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I've since discovered this is kind of one of those things that like bro-y Instagram accounts promote. This book was written kind of in the form of a diary. And while this man is like pondering things about leadership and just life in general, I think a lot of the prose and a lot of the thoughts that he communicated in this book actually really stuck with me. One of the passages that I highlighted was this one. It says, "The present moment is equal for all, so what is passing is equal also. The loss, therefore, turns out to be the merest fragment of time. No one can lose either the past or the future. How could anyone be deprived of what he does not possess?" And I annotated that as nobody can be late or behind in life. And it did what it had to do when I needed it. So I really enjoyed it. And if you're like undergoing a crisis, or you just need a book full of wisdom, life advice, or just ponderings from a person who like does a lot of deep reflecting, pick it up. I enjoyed it. The second book I randomly stumbled upon when I was looking for books on Amazon, and then I was looking through TikTok for recommendations. This is a collection of personal essays called Goodbye Again by Jonny Sun. This is also kind of written as a diary where he reflects on daily moments and the anxieties of life and moving and growing up and leaving your family behind, and just all these dynamics that one has to deal with as we grow. Gave me a lot of comfort. It's just like a warm little companion for when you're feeling a little down or lonely. Okay, the last part of this video is going to be all the books I read this year that were just really enjoyable. They're all fiction, and I just had a great time with them. There's not much else to be said. I just want to go through them. I am almost done with this book, but this is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He wrote 100 Years of Solitude, which I read a couple years back, and it is one of my favorite books. His writing style is unlike any other author that I've ever experienced. All his stories deal with the entire lifetime of a character. It's just one of those books, again, that has those little golden nuggets, and hopefully I'll pick up something else by him. Next up, we have Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. I had never heard of this book. I've heard of Yates, and I didn't know what to expect, but I highly enjoyed this. This is like a domestic drama. It's about this couple that moves from New York City to the suburbs, and it's how they deal with their newfound life and the tensions that they find and how they're afraid of getting boring, and do they even love each other? It's the unraveling of this couple's marriage comes to a very dramatic head. I cannot say enough good things about Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrot. So this book is from 1929, and it's about this woman in New York who gets divorced. Her husband walks out on her. She has to deal with the taboos, but it's really an exploration of herself and her personality, and it's funny and it's engaging, and it completely decenters men, which I thought was fun. Don't know how else to describe it except to say that this just feels like this woman is your best friend. Just her flippancy and attitude towards everything kind of gets you into a particular mood. At least it did for me. So I really enjoyed this. Pick up a copy of Ex-Wife if you can, because this was life-changing. Right here we have The Trackers by Charles Fraser. Now, I would say this book's biggest strength is its atmosphere. This is about an artist during the Great Depression who gets commissioned to go paint a mural at a post office in like rural Wyoming, and he's staying with this very wealthy couple. The wife ends up running away, and this artist is tasked with, locating her. Again, this is like the 1930s, and it was very atmospheric. I wouldn't say it's like my new favorite book, but if you're into cowboys, Western, Great Depression type, it was very, very atmospheric, and I thought it was well written for what it was. I feel like I'm saying I love every book that I'm picking up, but I loved this book. This is Twilight Sleep by Edith Wharton. I'm a big Edith Wharton fan, so that's like a huge disclaimer. Kind of stumbled upon this by accident, but it was the first book I read this year, and it really set the tone. Edith Wharton often deals with like social commentary, a lot of times social commentary about the upper class. So many themes in this book completely correlated to things that happen now, from like health fads to spiritualism, all that stuff. It's about a fucked up family in New York City, and they're going about their lives, and they're kind of tripping each other up, and they care and they don't care, and it's just a hoot and a half. How else to describe this? You know, this was written over 100 years ago, and I think it's still one of the most relevant pieces of literature. So that is Twilight Sleep by Edith Wharton. Another really great Edith Wharton novel I read this year was Glimpses of the Moon. Glimpses of the Moon is about this young couple who hangs out in wealthy social circles, but they're not wealthy themselves, and they decide to get married so that their friends can shower them with like gifts and vacations as newlyweds. And they end up falling in love, and it's about their drama. I enjoyed it just as much as Twilight Sleep. Glimpses of the Moon and Twilight Sleep, if you're wanting to get into Edith Wharton, I'd honestly start there because I'd say they're the most fun. So there were a couple of their books that I read this year that I'm not really going to mention just because I didn't necessarily enjoy them. They were just like, I'll list them on the screen here. But I would say I had a really, really successful reading year. I'm going to challenge myself this upcoming year to maybe try some new authors, upcoming authors, and see what I can find. So that was all the books that I read this year. A good mix, I would say, of fiction and nonfiction. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you got some good recommendations out of this. Let me know what you guys have been reading, and let's see if I can keep up this channel. Not for books necessarily, but this will be the starting point for me. All right, see you guys later. Bye.